Hello and welcome back to the Eyes of Ode Gaming channel for another game review, looking at one that is a little bit older today. That's right, sometimes I cover newer games and sometimes I go all the way back to 2010 to cover games, just cuz. Anyway, today we're taking a look at Just Cause 2, a game that released back in 2010, being developed by Avalanche Studios and published by Square Enix Europe. So what is this game? Have you spent all this time wondering that, but never got around to playing it, just like me? Well, today we're taking a look at various aspects of it to determine what it's all about, while I try to stay as objective as possible, so you can decide for yourself, is this game still worth it? Let's find out. So just one little caveat before we get into it that I want to get out of the way. When I cover older games like this, I try to do it without the nostalgia glasses, so the first time player can decide if the experience is going to hold up for them. So if you played this from back in the day and are wondering why I'm maybe a little critical about things that obviously haven't aged so well, then just know that this isn't a review from back in the day, this is a review from today. So the game takes place on the island of Panau, which is run by a dictatorship under Pandak Panay. Panau does not exist in reality, but the speculation I've read online is that it's inspired from Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia. Basically any Southeast Asian island has been speculated at some point as being the inspiration. The player takes on the role of Rico Rodriguez, though throughout the main campaign he's mostly referred to by most of the factions as Scorpio, a gun for hire in this chaotic country. If you played the original Just Cause, this one takes place a few years after that game, and there will be some familiar faces, such as Tom Sheldon. To understand the story of Just Cause 2, you don't need to have played the first one, as the story itself is rather self-contained and will be explained as you go along. That said, some of the recurring characters from the first will be in the second, and the game kind of assumes that you played the first and will have some rapport with these characters already. Personally, I played this one without having played the original, and without reading anything of the original game's story, and I was able to follow things just fine. So I would say it's safe to skip that one if you wish to begin with this title. Let's compare it to some other games off the start to give you a bit of an idea of what you're getting into. So the most obvious is other games in the series. I'm not going to bother going into detail as to why that is, because it seems pretty obvious to me, and if you've played the other games in the series, then you already know that this one's going to be similar. A game, or franchise rather, that I was reminded of was Far Cry. Not so much in terms of the gameplay or mechanic style of the games, as Far Cry is set in a first-person perspective, and there's some other differences. But instead, the overall setting, the missions, the factions, someone from the American continent meddling in island nation affairs, it's all there. Basically, if you like the missions and style of Far Cry, especially say Far Cry 3, I would say that this game has a very similar vibe to it. Aside from that, it's going to have a lot of similarities with other games from the time period that are open-world third-person action RPGs. So think things like Sleeping Dogs or Watch Dogs, just to give you a very rough comparison. The one game that I felt was most strongly similar though was Mercenaries, either the original or World in Flames. I was constantly reminded of that game with the open world, the access to a variety of vehicles, hijacking tanks and helicopters and whatever else you come across, and even the main campaign felt similar. Definitely a very comparable experience. So the mechanics in this game are going to range from the very typical and expected to actually fairly unique. We're looking at a third-person perspective game, and the player will have a main weapon, say a rifle or some other typically longer range weapon, as well as a couple of sidearms, which can be pistols or small machine guns, which can also be dual-wielded. As I touched on earlier, there are a ton of vehicles which you can get around the massive open world with. From standard cars or jeeps to tanks to boats to helicopters to fighter jets, as well as a bunch of other stuff in between. There's a type of currency in the game called chaos, which is earned essentially by causing chaos, such as destroying targets or buildings, assassinations, and completing faction missions. As you play through the campaign, you need to take advantage of earning as much chaos as possible, as it is required to progress through the main campaign. And if you don't meet requirements, it can feel a little grindy to build up enough. I really do recommend just causing as much chaos as possible whenever possible while doing regular missions. There's also heat, which is similar to GTA or some other title like that, where killing or damaging government property means government forces will progressively get more aggressive in trying to bring you down. This mechanic is very simple, basically more heat, more troops after you. Of course, this means you need to do a little bit of balancing, as typically generating chaos comes from doing actions that will also generate heat. There's also a black market, which you can use to purchase weapons, vehicles, or ammunition, using the game's actual currency, not the chaos kind, to purchase with. There's also a kind of fast travel called extraction available through the black market to pick you up at a location and take you to another spot via helicopter, where the player will typically parachute out at or use the grappling hook. And this brings up another big mechanic in the game, the grappling hook. Basically, it's a hook that you use that shoots at a target and grapples to it. This is used for reaching higher places or latching onto moving vehicles. You can use it to connect something to a vehicle or a bunch of other things. It may sound like a simple extra, but ends up being something that will be used extensively as you play. So I would say that in graphics, this one is still definitely playable, not horribly blocky or anything, but it hasn't aged quite as well as some other titles from the time period. Some of the cutscenes can definitely be a little strange by today's standards, but nothing too horrible. A little bit of janky movement and uncanny valley looks, but not horrible. The map of the open world is massive, though I found that most locations and areas do look very similar. Essentially either tropical island or cold mountains. The cutscene sequences that play when you start a mission become very repetitive very quickly, as each faction essentially has the exact same scene just with different actors. You go to a location and contact the faction. The leader rolls up, gives you some supplies, and tells you to do the mission. There are a couple exceptions to this, but that's what 90% of the missions are going to feel like. So what things are going to set this one apart from others? Well, you've got the map, which I've already said is huge. Now, depending on your personal taste, this will either be a really good thing or maybe not so good of a thing. Personally, I tend to love huge worlds that I can get lost in and explore. However, for me, traveling across this one just felt rather boring, as there really isn't much going on in between locations. This one really feels like the original ancestor of those great big open world maps with nothing in it. They did it before it was the common thing to do. If you really enjoy traveling around inconsequential areas with nothing specific to do in them, this could actually be a really great feature for you. I know that some people really like to explore for the sake of it, not exploring to find a particular thing, or to discover a new mission, or even to see something that's truly unique, but instead just to drive around and immerse themselves in the world. If that's you, well, there's a lot of world to drive around in. That said, if you're more of a focus gamer and you're trying to get to a mission location that you can't extract to, it can feel a little grindy to travel across the great expanses of nothing, or at least the rural villages filled with people just going about their daily lives with nothing really of importance happening. Other than the world, the grappling hook has to be another unique aspect of this game. Like I said, it's really used a ton, from getting to higher locations and grappling onto vehicles. Is going to get a lot of use in your playthrough. I would say that at the time this was released, it was probably a very novel concept and felt super unique and interesting. If we remove the nostalgia glasses and look at it through a lens of modern gaming, it feels a little gimmicky and can be annoying with how much you're forced to use it. It's not like it's a terrible feature, and this is very subjective, but personally I've never been a fan of grappling hooks in games, and it's the main character's main gimmick, so... Again, this critique though is going to be really up to personal preference, and for some it's an amazing features, and for others it'll just feel kind of meh. Sound is fine, voice acting is okay, and music is there. Not too standout here, but I'll play some examples here for you to make up your own mind.
It is a fact universally true that politicians are easily duped, threatened, or bribed.
Hostile spotted! Attack! Attack!
Heck, where's my manners? Some of my boys got a little carried away with their lynching.
Reports of violence in the sector. Respond to site immediately.
Okay, opinions incoming. So I've tried to stay mostly objective so far. I know I've put some opinions in, but it's hard to avoid them completely when doing a review. But now it's all opinion. If you just wanted to know what the game is to decide if it's worth picking up all these years later, that's done. Keep in mind though, whether or not I like the game doesn't mean anything for you. Different people like different games, and even if I love it or hate it, you might have the opposite experience. Bottom line is, if what you saw and heard interests you, check it out. If not, then now at least you know it's probably safe to pass on it. So did I enjoy this, and do I recommend it for the first time player? Well, personally, I found it kinda meh, and I'm sure many people are gonna get upset over that, as it's a fan favorite of the past. I know that this game was released a long time ago, and at the time it was probably super innovative and unique. But like I said, we like to take off those nostalgia glasses and look at how the game holds up today to see if it's worth it for the first time player now. Some games are just truly ageless and are great after decades, whereas others, not so much. So I don't want to confuse you, I did have an overall enjoyable experience, but it just felt kind of like a mid-level average game. And I'm positive it's just because my first experience with it has been so many years after its release. Probably if I played it back then, it would occupy a special place in my memory. But it doesn't. So do I recommend it? Well, if you want a big open world shooter and you're on a budget, you can probably pick this one up for a very bargain price. Otherwise, there's so many other games out there that scratch the same itch and do it a little bit better in my opinion. Likely you could just skip to a newer release in the franchise and get something a little more modernized and not so aged out as this particular title. I would think that the biggest appeal of this game is going to be to people who have played other games in the franchise and just want to go back and play one of the earlier releases. So I hope you enjoyed this look at Just Cause 2. Have you played the game already? Did you agree or disagree with my assessment? I would enjoy to read about your takes in the comments section as well. Please like the video if you found it entertaining or informative, and also consider subscribing to the channel. I make a variety of gaming content and would be very happy to have you join the community and direct the future of the channel. Otherwise, thank you so much for taking the time to watch today, and until next time, take care.